In this OSPFv3 example, let's configure R5. R3, R4, R5, and R6 are already participating in the OSPFv3 process. As you can see, R3's gigabit 3/0 interface is in area 0. R4 has 2/0 and both its serial interfaces participating in area 0. R7's completely in area 567, and R6 is an area border router with a few interfaces in area 0 and a few interfaces in area 567. So R5 is also going to be an area border router in this particular example, and we are going to enable OSPFv3 on it. We are going to place serial 1/0 in area 0, and we're going to place interfaces Fast Ethernet 2/1 and Fast Ethernet 2/0 in area 567. So let's go ahead and do that right now. On R5, let's type in show IPv6 protocols to see what we're running right now as IPv6 routing protocols, and we're not running anything. Show, run, pipe to, and include IPv6 unicast routing. I want to see if IPv6 routing has been turned on this particular router, and it hasn't been. So let's do that first. Let's type in IPv6 unicast routing. So now in R5, we have IPv6 routing enabled. And now let's configure our IPv6 process, IPv6 router, and it's OSPF. It's asking us for a process ID. Remember, this process ID does not have to match, so I don't have to look at the other routers to see which process ID they're running like we had to do with EIGRP. But I do like to keep consistency within my organization, so I'm going to go over to R7, and we're going to type in show IPv6 protocols, and we can see that we're running OSPF process 1 for IPv6. I'm going to do the same thing just to keep it consistent within our infrastructure. So IPv6 router OSPF1, we'll hit enter. And now, since we are running IPv4 and OSPFv2 on this router as well, we were automatically going to generate a router ID in this particular case. But I'm going to show you the router ID command. So router ID, and we're going to force it to be 192.5.5.5. 5.5.5. That's what we're going to force it to be in this particular case. And let's take a look at some of the other options we have. Because remember what we were saying? We were saying that with OSPFv3, a lot of the configurations, a lot of the services and features were still the same. So if we look, we can set up some area parameters. For example, the area range command for summarization here. We can set up the area. Well, let's jump into that. We'll just take a look at what our options are. So we have our area. What area are we going to be dealing with here? Let's say it's area 456. And as you can see, we can do authentication. We can set up NSSA areas. We can do stub areas. We can do the area range command, virtual links. So all the information, all the configuration is the same. You don't have to learn anything new at this point in time in regards to those. They still perform the same function. We can do default information originate, as you can see back in router OSPFv3 configuration mode for setting up that default route, taking the static route, injecting it in OSPFv3, advertising it to all the other routers inside the environment. Maximum pass for equal path load balancing, passive interface. We'll perform redistribution here as well. We'll see that when we get to our redistribution discussion, as you've already seen router ID. So everything you've learned about, everything you will be learning about OSPFv2 moving forward applies here to OSPFv3 configuration as well. We do it under this. So that's pretty much it. We're done at this point in time for our example of setting up the OSPF process and giving it a router ID. Now we have to go to interface configuration mode, and we said, what, it's going to be interface serial 1/0, and in this case we're going to type in IPv6 OSPF, and notice the options we have. We can set up interface authentication, we can change the cost, we can change the dead intervals, we can change the hello intervals, we can set up, we can change the MTU, or set up, the MTU ignore command, so that way there we don't have to have matching MTUs. We can forget about that as one of the qualifications for forming a neighbor adjacency. We can set up the interface priority. We can change the network type. All of that happens right here on our interface configuration mode. So with IPv6 OSPF, we want to enable it first. So what was the process we used? We used a process number of 1, and then it's asking us for the area. What area is this interface going to be in? So let's go back to our image. And our image is saying that serial 1/0 is in area 0. So let's go ahead and do that. Put it in area 0, and we should see a neighbor adjacency formed, since R4 is already participating in the OSPFv3 process, and we can see that right there. It's telling us that OSPFv3, we had an adjacency change, and it was for process 1, and we formed a neighbor adjacency with this particular router. That's its router ID, R4, 192.44.44, and it was on our serial 1/0 interface, and we went through all the OSPF states, and we eventually got to the full state, and our loading is completely done now. Let's go over to the other interfaces we have, which are Fast Ethernet 2/1 and 2/0, and we will configure OSPF on those interfaces. So interface Fast Ethernet 2/1, and we're going to use the IPv6 OSPF1 area. Oh, what was the area? Let's go back and take a look there. Area 567 in this particular case for those two interfaces. So we'll type in area 567. And we'll do the same thing for Fast Ethernet 2/0. And we'll say 567 as well, that particular interface. And we can see we formed our neighborship with the router that has a router ID of 192.167.7, and that just happens to be R7. So that's the basic configuration for that is the basic configuration for OSPF v3 to get it up and running.